So, hey Tyognis, I am Ruminous, and today we're talking about the gameplay aspect of flow. Flow is the rate of growth in a game. Growth is what changes in a game, but flow is the rate of growth. How fast or slow does that growth happen? How quickly the game changes can help make the growth sustainable, or make it just obnoxious or even useless. The reason that this is a different video is because growth and flow can be entirely different and can entirely affect the enjoyment of the game independently. The expression, great idea, terrible execution, fits well here. The developers can have great ideas for changes in gameplay or the story, but can have terrible timing. It is like when a company comes over and you have to shove all of your clothes into a closet. It does its job, and the room looks nice, but when that closet is opened, then the avalanche of debris and sweaty clothes will come crashing down and remind you of all the chores that you still have to do.
Thank you.
No, Doctor. We're not that close yet. Also, you have blood on you. And I'm wearing a white shirt. You ruined my white sweatshirt. If the flow takes too long to enact the changes, the game can stagnate and be boring. If they happen too fast, they can make the changes overwhelming and not encourage the player to use the new mechanics. If the story takes too long to grow, it can kill any interest or power in the character's attention. If it's too fast, it can seem ridiculous or exhausting. On the other side, the growth can be dirty cabbage leaves, but the changes happen in a reasonable manner. Typically, fast-paced games will have quick flows as it fits with the setting, and players for these games are expecting fast changes. Slow-paced games will take longer to enact growth for the same reason. Nessun vuol giocare come Desmond. Nessun fa attenzione al story principale. No one wants to play as Desmond. No one cares about the main story. I don't know how to say main story in Italian. I feel like that's close enough. Probably storia principale, but Jesus Christ, this takes forever. No one cares. No one has cared. The reason that some flows may be abrupt or problematic may be due to cut content, and the sections of the game that would have made the flow work better have been removed for time or financial constraints. It's difficult to fix the flow in these situations, as removing the mechanic can also be a waste of programming and work for other departments, especially when the mechanic is useful or needed to progress in the story. The best advice would be to find a place to introduce it earlier, or reduce the scope and impact of the growth, if possible, to limit the bad flow. Stab her. This dead lady decides to just wake up and stand behind you, and she's got no eyes. The perfect example of bad flow comes from God of War 2018. The game, rightfully so, received critical acclaim for the development and relationship between Kratos and his boy. The game revolves entirely around them and how they begin to connect, and how Kratos learns to be a compassionate father in his very Spartan, strict, stoic kind of way. The flow for the development is slow enough to be realistic, where Kratos learns from the boy, and boy learns from Kratos. They grow to understand each other until boy learns that he's a demigod and then goes full Anakin and starts murdering gods. What? The change in boy's attitude, demeanor, and aggression make no sense. He completely flips to a cold-blooded killer, then flips back after he's healed. The change in his character could have made sense if it didn't happen so suddenly. If it wasn't so contrary to his character, this conflict would have made sense. One issue that I have with the growth and general story is that they never mention his old family, which were the impetus for the whole set of actions in the old trilogy. This is more of a critique of the story than of the growth and the flow, but I find it interesting to mention.
Close your heart to it. Come then. We have a long journey ahead.
Punch him. That was two, I guess. So again, this is the problem, is at the beginning of this game, he's deathly afraid to kill anything alive. And then by the midpoint, when he learns that he's a demigod, he loses his mind. And although I do like that they set up the scene pretty early, that he's a little rambunctious, and that he will, like, that he's in over his head, that's a whole different level of shit though. That's my problem, is that it's not like he becomes a brat and just disobeys Kratos for one reason or the other. He literally just goes on a rampage. There is an abominable amount of options that are happening. And the menus just don't end. There's everything everywhere. Oh, sweet Jesus. I'm glad that my friend helped me play this, because I would not understand any of this if I was just looking at it like you guys probably are. Flow needs to match the theme of the game, but also the progression of the rest of the game. Giving the player too much at once will cause them to be overwhelmed, and they will tend to pick the easiest option. They may try with other mechanics later, but as before, we are creatures of habit. What works is what we stick with. If we don't have time to try new things with enough time, we will go back to old methods, even if they are less effective or more time consuming. I have no health. I'm playing it hard. This is not gonna bode well. But let's go, Masked Man. Increasing complexity and difficulty often has flow issues, as just throwing more enemies, rockets, intense AI, whatever, is used in an attempt to increase difficulty, it leads to frustration. I will get into this more in the difficulty episode, but ramping things up to burnt experience levels will only get people frustrated and mad if they didn't have time to get used to the new challenges. Give me a chance, come on, give me a chance to get over there, man. I'm getting pummeled by the horde of these things. Move! Didn't even get a chance. I can't even get over there. Not only are there 20 of these little weird mouth flying things, I didn't even get a chance to get over there. I didn't even see that arm. I mean, that was fair. I mean, I just can't even see anything. When I taught, I always planned my curriculum, my units, and my lessons backwards. I started with the end, where I wanted to end up, then I worked backwards to the start. If I know where my students will end, I can create a road backwards to connect the initial idea. Because I know how it should end, I can design the mechanics around it to generate a good flow. Mechanics and story elements should be reinforced throughout the entire game, which is why backwards planning is actually very helpful here. To prevent mechanics from being underutilized or overutilized, we can look at each area, see what we want to happen by the end, and plan certain sections that have those certain elements. I designed my Latin curriculum to match the connected ideas. I gave enough experience for the difficult concepts throughout the entire semester, and I included previous grammar and new lessons so that it's always reinforced. We're in chapter 6. Why am I waiting until now to do anything? And also, like, it won't let you do anything until you finish that. That's just dumb. Why did you wait this goddamn long to tell me about this shit? Uncharted 3 takes far too long to introduce most of the major components of the game. The tutorial is the first 6 chapters out of 22. That's roughly 35 to 40% of the game. You know, it's not, you know, half the game isn't teaching you the same thing. It's not, but it waits 40% of the game to teach you the base components of the game. The first few chapters are spent entirely on climbing, with parts on exploring an area for clues to progress. It lasts until chapter 4, where shooting and stealth come in. Then finally in chapter 6, grenades are introduced. In a fast-paced game, these introductions should be done within the first few chapters, especially since the mechanics are not complex or difficult to understand. Throwing a grenade is one button. There's combat plenty in the other chapters. You could have introduced it at any other point. There was no reason to wait until chapter 6 for this. These tutorials also require the player to do the action with locking the controls, which also just causes annoyance and slows the progress of the player. There's also a part in the middle of the game with swimming that is used only in that single section. The introduction of mechanics in the game takes too long for a game that is about constant high-octane action, and makes replaying the game a little bit worthless for the first third to skip all the tutorials and the necessary lack of autonomy. Super Mario RPG, Legend of the Seven Stars, has a very slow flow in the beginning, but the overall flow is well done when adding mechanics into the game. The player starts out by infiltrating Bowser's castle and fighting a few low-level enemies, and the screen shows the button letters to show the available actions. The game does the proper thing of letting the player experiment first. There are a few fights to get the player used to the fighting system, and during the battle with Bowser, the player has to hit the chain, which is directly stated after a few hits to show that different enemies can be chosen, if it was not discovered previously. Afterwards, the player is directly told about timed hits, how to save, and how to use items within about 2 minutes. These are not unique features to a game, and thus are not overloading the player, just explaining how they are done in this particular game. The player then roams the levels and can interact with a box with an item, learning that you can get items from boxes in the real world. Then you learn that you don't need to fight everything, and then eventually you will meet a boss that is large, and it's clear that larger enemies are bosses and they must be fought. The game progressively adds shops, new characters, and whatever later on.
Another dream about him.
Well, you know, some people are like that. Nothing wrong with it, Roxas. It's okay to open up to it. You can be okay. You can be yourself. It's okay. Kingdom Hearts 2 has an incredible slow pace to its story, especially in the beginning. As I mentioned before, JRPGs and similar games have a slower pace, as that is the style of the genre, but even so, the Roxas part of the game is needlessly long as an introduction. The purpose of the epilogue is to make the main antagonist have some connection to Sora, but the issue is that many of the tasks drag on forever. The initial story is set to teach some of the mechanics and the gameplay aspects, but the ability to steal a word makes no sense. It is never brought up in the series again, so it's just a waste. It doesn't make any sense. Then the game makes the player do some repetitive mini-games to gain money for a train ticket. The price of the ticket is apparently worth more than gold, so it takes forever to progress. It takes 5 hours to get to the point where the player is actually ready to do anything revolving around the Keyblade, the main antagonist, or why the hell I am playing as Roxas instead of Sora. Although this part of the story is integral to the rest of the game, it takes far too long to get through, and even when rushing and skipping the cutscenes. Instead of the realistic thing of, yeah, I get that, that's what I just did! Undertale, in contrast, has pretty spectacular flow in its story. It begins with a brief explanation of the world, throws the player into a conversation with the talking flower, then quickly shows you how the combat system will work. After being saved, the player is guided through a tutorial on how to show some of the other mechanics of the game, then likewise stuck in an area until they force their way out. The player can explore a bit and can engage with the moose cow lady thing, but the emotional connection to this motherly figure still lands with only 10, 15, 20 minutes of gameplay. After leaving, the player engages with the world, quickly finds out that the monsters are hunting the character for the delicious soul, but speedily progresses through each area. Generally, the story will flow with entering a new area, interacting with a new antagonist, getting thrown off course and into danger, then face against the antagonist. The puzzles and impediments slow the character and may add more to the world, but don't take too much time that the player feels the story drag on. In each area, you find out more about the various monsters, how the humans ruin the world, and why there's such hate for you. Exploring and talking with the NPCs help flesh out the world and keeps the growth happening even outside of the main story. Overall, Undertale steadily progresses through the game at a decent enough pace to keep the story moving, but not so fast that it shoves everything in at once. When planning levels, gameplay aspects, mechanics, or story, it is best to look at the end goal. Ask yourself, what do you want the player to learn or achieve by completing this action, and you can build the road from there. Having a syllabus or bullet point list of things to include can help orient the game to keep mechanics fresh, make changes organic and gradual, and keep players engaged as the game changes around them. Gameplay controls and aspects should be reinforced throughout the game, both as a reminder to the player about their options, and to not have the levels have the same pattern or actions every time. Thanks everybody for watching. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like, subscribe, and ring the bell to be notified of future videos. If you have any constructive criticism of things that I missed, misinterpreted, got things wrong, you have any games that you think should have an honorable mention to this, please leave in the comment section below so that we can continue this discourse. We will continue on next week with the gameplay aspect of difficulty, which, man, that's going to be a fun one to deal with all the people who say get good to me. I'm sure it's going to be great. But anyway, thanks everybody for watching. It's been a pleasure. I'll see you guys next week. Valete omnes.